Israel's military continues to target senior figures in Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. In fact, Israel says it has killed 2 high-ranking Quds Force commanders in its latest strikes. Shariari is the commander of the Quds Force's weapons transfer unit. Israel claims he was responsible for all weapons transfers from the Iranian regime to its proxies across the Middle East. He also allegedly supplied missiles and rockets to Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen, including weapons used in recent attacks on Israel. The military released this video claiming it shows the strike that killed him. Shariari was reportedly killed over 1,000 kilometers from Israel while traveling in western Iran. Israeli defense minister also claimed that their military had also killed another veteran commander, Izadi, he was reportedly killed in an apartment in Iran's Qom province. Izadi led the Palestine Corps of the Overseas Arm, or Quds Force. In fact, Israel claims Izadi was one of the main orchestrators of the October 7 Hamas attack and directed Hamas units in Lebanon while helping rebuild the group's military wing in Gaza. There was no confirmation from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on the killing of the 2 commanders. The Quds Force carries out covert operations on behalf of the Revolutionary Guard outside Iran. And with us on the broadcast this minute from Birmingham is Professor David Dunn, Professor of International Politics in the Department of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Birmingham. Thanks very much for being here. I have to begin by asking you for your assessment of the latest at this point, with those attacks continuing and also these attacks that specifically target Iran's nuclear program. In the wake of what Trump has said, we're talking about that 2-week period, but what do you really see happening during those 2 weeks?
Well, first of all, on the attacks, Israel has air dominance over Iran, which means its warplanes can fly over the country with impunity, and they're using the opportunity to do several things. They are attacking Iran's ballistic missiles. They're attacking its nuclear facilities to degrade them even further than the initial attacks, and they are doing attacks on the Revolutionary Guard Corps in an effort to if possible, actually degrade the capacity of Iran to be an actor in the Middle East, but also to actually undermine the instruments of the regime as an aim to remove the regime, if possible, in its entirety. In terms of the question on the 2 weeks, really, Trump is trying to give himself some breathing space to try to make up his own mind what he wants to do, given that there are lots of voices within his political base and the MAGA base who are uneasy about the idea of America getting involved in another Middle Eastern conflict. When Trump himself was part of his claim to be elected was that he wouldn't get involved in America involved in wars around the world as his predecessors had done. So he's given himself 2 weeks, and he's given himself 2 weeks for a number of reasons. He's hoping that the regime will collapse of its own accord, and I imagine the CIA are working with Iranian agents trying to topple the regime from within. He's also given himself the opportunity for there to be a diplomatic route. His hope is that Iran will unconditionally surrender. Well, that Iran will realise that the game is up, and that they will actually make huge concessions, which they haven't yet done, and actually agree to completely denuclearise, and possibly even to agree to stop meddling in the politics of the Middle East more broadly. That's still a big ask, but that's what he hopes to do. But I think think also he's given himself space to say, okay, I gave them the opportunity to negotiate. I've waited patiently, and now my patience has run out. If he decides ultimately to use American aircraft to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, and particularly the nuclear facility at Fordow, which is deeply buried and one which the Israelis can't destroy themselves, and only the American military has the capacity to do so. So that, I think, is the overall assessment as to why we have this potential 2-week delay and what Israel is doing in the meantime.
Right. So taking a cue from what you just said, speaking specifically about if America does get directly involved in the war, there's also that immediate question of what happens in that scenario, and to what extent or can China and Russia then stay away? Because then this is a war that spills over. And of course, this does then in a way become an all-out regional war and spills over beyond as well, perhaps.
Well, I think what's interesting is that neither China nor Russia have shown any inclination to be involved in this conflict directly or even indirectly. And I think what the Americans will be calculating and what they will be saying to the Iranians is, unless you give in diplomatically, we will destroy the Fordow nuclear facilities. If you then respond by attacking either international shipping or American forces in the Middle East, what you can then expect is that the full weight of the American military will come down on you. So in a sense, you either negotiate now or you take what's coming in terms of the nuclear reactor at Fordow, but if you widen the war, then you will lose. And the Americans are calculating on keeping the war localized by that threat of that interwar deterrence on Iran, that if it does decide to widen the war, they will be hammered by the American military. Of course, wars can be unpredictable, that the results are never guaranteed, and there is the possibility that Iran can use its short-range weapons to attack either Western bases or American bases or American ships in the Middle East, or indeed America's allies in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, or international shipping in the Gulf of Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz. They're all possibilities, and they're all possibilities that would see a widening of the war. There is no prospect of the war widening really beyond that. There's no appetite on any of the other Middle Eastern powers to come to the aid of Iran. Iran is deeply popular. It's seen as a promoting revolution in the area, and it has no friends. And indeed, many of the states in the area will be glad to see Iran's nuclear ambitions thwarted by the action of the Israelis and the Americans, even if they won't say so publicly. So I don't think there's any prospect of this cascading into a much wider international war. It's a war that's limited to air power and missiles. It's not a war that has any prospect of ground action, boots on the ground invasions or anything like that. So it's quite different in character to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And the Americans, if they do get involved, will be calculating and planning and using diplomacy to try and keep this as limited as possible.
Right. Also, a quick comment on, like we discussed, Trump's 2-week period. It is in a way a pressure tactic as far as Iran is concerned. Do you really see Iran coming to the negotiating table at this point? Do you see any scope for negotiations or diplomacy right now?
Well, there is a precedent here. In 1988, the Iranians effectively gave in and surrendered to the war in Iraq, and so there is that precedent there. So, but in this instance, there's really two possibilities: that either the Ayatollah concedes and makes concessions, or does a deal that's in some ways phased, that actually stops the Israelis bombing the hell out of his country, or that other people in the country, perhaps the Revolutionary Guard Corps, remove the Ayatollah and actually change the nature of the regime and actually force Iran into a situation that it recognised how naked it is to the prospect of being bombed further by Israel and the Americans, and therefore comes to accommodation that way around. But of course, there have been efforts this week in Geneva with European foreign ministers talking talking to the Iranian foreign minister, trying to actually persuade them to start negotiating with the Americans in earnest. Because what the Iranians have said so far is that we will not talk to the Americans while the Israelis are keeping bombing. Well, there's no prospect of that happening. Israel is not going to give up its opportunity to keep pressuring the Iranians, and indeed keep bombing in a way that actually strengthens the hands of the Americans in their bargaining position with Iran. So I think it's likely that either Iran folds and recognize just how weak their position is, or that their position will be weakened further when America bombs the Fordow nuclear facility.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us with those perspectives there.
Always a pleasure.